Hello, welcome back to Desperate Living, and as promised it's time to take a look at a couple of new or newish box sets. I'll have a look at one of them today and we'll save the other one for a future video, but let's kick off with a particular favourite movie of mine, something that I've loved for a very long time, and I'm really glad to see it finally being given the sort of treatment that it deserves, I guess, and that also that you would never have really ever expected it to have. I'm talking, of course, about Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter, which was the first of the new releases from the latest incarnation of Hammer Films. If you're a fan of Hammer, then I'm sure you'll be aware that it has over the last however many years, I mean essentially since its initial demise at the end of the 1970s, undergone various changes in ownership, some more successful than others, but the current Hammer seem to be actually making a very solid effort to not only produce new material but actually focus on some of their classics, giving them the sort of Blu-ray UHD releases that they frankly deserve and that we'd perhaps despaired of them ever getting. As you may know, Hammer Films, obviously the rights to a lot of their movies are caught up with various companies in the US and internationally. As a company, they were financed by anyone from EMI to Warner Brothers to various other people, so the rights issues are often a bit tangled. So for Hammer to be able to actually put out their own releases under the Hammer, what would it be called? Hammer Video? Hammer Films? Who knows? But anyway, for them to actually put out their own stuff in these luxurious editions is fantastic. This, as I say, was the first. There have been several more since. This is, as I speak, the only one that I actually have. I'm more than up for having more, believe me. But let's have a quick look inside the box set. But before we do that, a little bit of context about Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter.
In the 18th century in Central Europe, a black terror swept across the face of the land. The curse of vampirism, which had been a half-forgotten memory for hundreds of years, returned with a fury that struck unholy fear into the hearts of every man, woman, and child. One man dared to make a stand against this evil epidemic. One man dared to hurl a challenge of cold steel against the terror of the undead. He was Captain Kronos, Vampire Hunter.
It is commonly supposed that a vampire attacks in only one way, by biting the neck and draining the victim of blood. The girls you spoke of, they were not drained of blood, but of youth, of life itself. You see? He's been bitten on the mouth.
God's sake, I survived a vampire's bite.
But he is not the man you are.
I'm doomed. My soul a never-ending torment.
Kill me! Kill me!
Her life will be yours. Yours. Her youth will pulse through your veins, my darling, replenishing, restoring. Take her.
At your service, sir. To the death. Yes, you bleed, my lord. This is God's blade.
forged for your black heart.
So this is a film shot in 1972, released in 1973 as the back end of a double bill with Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell, which was in many ways the last gasp of traditional Hammer. After that film we had The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires, a couple of years later To the Devil a Daughter, and then effectively that was it. Hammer had succumbed to changing fashions and their apparent inability to keep up with the times. The interesting thing, if you read any interviews with the people from Hammer, certainly in the 1970s or in the late 70s and perhaps moving on a little bit further, is how they genuinely didn't understand any of the films that they'd made themselves, that perhaps played a little bit with the Hammer formula and took it forward, changed it into something new. Equally, Hammer fans, has to be said, especially the Hammer fans that were also writers, tended to want the company to just carry on doing exactly the same thing that they've been doing since the mid-1950s. Which is fine, sort of understandable I suppose. If you like something you want to see more of it, but to survive in a world where we were seeing films like The Exorcist, The Omen, Rosemary's Baby, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Last House on the Left, you name it, Hammer really needed to change and adapt. By the end of the 1960s, their films were already starting to feel a little bit formulaic, repetitive, as if they were just sitting on their laurels and thinking that people would just carry on turning out to see another Dracula film that was effectively the same as the previous Dracula film. And yeah, not really pushing forward or inventing, other than the addition of nudity that they embraced to a certain degree at the start of the 1970s. There seemed to be a considerable reluctance to actually try new things. It's kind of ironic because I think when they did try to change things up and move forward, it was quite successful, at least artistically. You look at films like Demons of the Mind, Straight On Till Morning, Blood from the Mummy's Tomb, Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires, Vampire Circus, even the modern day Draculas, Dracula AD 1972, and especially I think The Satanic Rites of Dracula, which for me is arguably Hammer's most interesting film of the 1970s, then you can see that they were putting some effort in, but then it was scuppered. The effort was coming from independent producers working for Hammer, and then the whole thing was tended to be scuppered by the Hammer high-ups who didn't understand any of these films. You look at how films like Demons of the Mind, for instance, were treated, shoved away on the arse end of a double bill, similar to what happened with Captain Kronos. The disdain that Michael Carreras, who ran Hammer, had for quite a few of these movies, Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires, the modern day Draculas, Kronos again, then yeah, I mean it's just as if they felt that anything that moved away from the formula was a bad thing and a mistake, and kind of made that true because they then didn't treat these films very well, shoved them, as I say, like on double bills, and lo and behold, yeah, they weren't big hits. Go figure. Equally, I think the critics were far too keen to criticise Hammer for doing anything outside their comfort zone, and still are to a certain degree. It has to be said, I'm quite fascinated by the way that a lot of Hammer fandom is, even now in 2025, still a little bit snotty and oddly moralising about the way Hammer introduced nudity into their movies, as if this was like too much. And well, let's be fair here, with the possible exception of Lost for a Vampire, it's not as if they were actually making softcore films. nudity was a commonplace thing across cinema at that time, and I don't think Hammer were doing anything particularly outrageous. It has to be pointed out that The Vampire Lovers these days has a 15 rating from the British Board of Film Classification, so it's clearly not considered to be soft porn by them, and they're not the most liberal of people. So it's really interesting to see that Captain Kronos was the first of the new Hammer releases to appear in these luxurious editions. Suggests that the people who are now running Hammer have perhaps more of an understanding of these films, of this film in particular, of its value creatively, of its quality as a movie. It's taken a long time. I recall seeing this film first on TV, when it was first shown on TV in 1980, August the 3rd, I believe. I did look that up, it's not like it's burned into my memory, but yeah, I think it was August the 3rd, as part of the horror double bill, and immediately loved it. Immediately saw that this was a movie that could have been a way forward for Hammer if it had been treated properly, if it hadn't been seen as a bit of an embarrassment. Slipped out, as I say, with Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell. I think that was a pairing in the US. In the UK, I believe it played on a double bill with a martial arts movie. But yeah, not a bad double bill when you think about it. I mean, this was a swashbuckler, an action film as much as a horror film. It plays with the gothic, it reinvents the idea of what vampires might be. I don't want to tell you too much about this film because if you're unfamiliar with it, it's a treat to experience. But effectively, Captain Kronos is a vampire hunter who discovers new species of vampires, not vampires that necessarily drain people of blood, but in this particular film they drain people of youth. So the film was written and directed by Brian Clemens, best known as the man behind The Avengers, the great British TV show, not the Marvel thing. And you can see that here. You can see that same sense of irreverence, humour. Maybe not quite as much as you get in The Avengers. It's not obviously as surreal, but it's got those elements to it. And it felt like it was definitely a breath of fresh air from what was becoming a very kind of tired gothic theme, while still acknowledging the importance of those early Hammer Gothics. And this isn't a film that dismisses the past of Hammer, it just reinvents it and potentially offered a way forward. You would think in a different world we would have had numerous Kronos sequels. I always thought the character and the concept would have made a great TV series. I believe that Brian Clemens had the idea that Kronos, because of his name, Kronos, obviously time, could go through time, essentially, go through different periods, and was a kind of an immortal character in himself. Now, I don't know how you would really make that work as an ongoing series, but you could make a series of films that were standalone movies, I suppose, where Kronos could be a character who appears in different times, different places, different incarnations. I also think that if you look at something like Buffy the Vampire Slayer years later, you can see that there's a great opportunity to have that character who may be a vampire hunter, vampire slayer, but could still fight all other kinds of monsters as well. So I think that the Kronos films, had they existed in a different time, a different place, could have been really inventive and unusual, and each one a unique experience. But of course, we never got that. We never got the Kronos TV series. That would have been great. Still time for that, I suppose. If anyone from Hammer's watching this, you might want to think about that, if you haven't already. So first of all, we have the little card thing that goes over the box when it's shrink wrapped, the usual sort of stuff. Makes a nice little holder here, I suppose. You cast it aside. The box, incidentally, is this lovely embossed product, but then when you actually remove it, you have this additional box. We'll go inside here in a moment. So the artwork from the disc on one side, the original Kronos poster, one of the original Kronos posters on the other. And then in here, first of all, let's look at the discs. It's an impressive set, as you can see. It contains 5 discs. You won't want to watch all these discs, I'll explain why in a moment if you haven't already guessed. So the first disc contains both the UK theatrical version in 1661 widescreen and in 1371 full screen, which is how the film was filmed. And the second disc is the US widescreen 1851 theatrical version. These are both the UHD discs, and so the reason why you won't want to watch all these discs is that discs 3 and 4 are essentially the same as those, but on Blu-ray. So you have the option, you know, if you don't have a UHD player, you have the Blu-rays available. Disc 5 is documentaries and interviews, so essentially all the extras. What are they? Well, let's have a quick look in the extensive booklet. This is an 134-page booklet, 132 pages plus cover, and it'll give us the full list of contents at the back here. So as well as a new 4K restoration of the film, plenty of detail about that. We've got 2 new introductions, one from Brian Clemens. We have 2 commentary tracks. No, we have plenty of commentary tracks. Actually, what am I saying? More than 2. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 commentary tracks from everyone from Caroline Munro, the sons of Brian Clemens, Clemens himself, Shane Bryant, John Carson, Marcus Hearn. There's critical appraisals as well. You know, these date from various points, so there's a couple from 2024. There's one from 2024, a couple from 2011, one from 2020, one from 2003. So versions recorded for different releases of this film over the years. So as well as the commentaries, what else do we have? We have lots of promotional material, trailers, mute clean titles, US radio spots, the original BBFC censor card, which I believe that these days they don't want companies to use at the front of the film anymore for whatever reason, possibly because they get embarrassed when it turns out that a film that was considered to be suitable for the entire family in the mid-1960s now has a restrictive age placed on it. There's a documentary on Brian Clemens himself. It's really interesting, kind of feature documentary that, in a way, is well worth the price of the box set in itself. This was made freshly for this release in 2024. We also have a cast and crew reunion from 2028. Footage from the Festival of Fantastic Films, the festival in Manchester, a few different interviews with guests, Clemens, Horst Janssen. We have more interviews. There's a kind of documentary about Hammer in the 1970s with Kim Newman and Stephen Jones. Stills gallery. This booklet, of course, and something else that I'll show you in a moment. But let's talk about the booklet. This is full of original archive articles, again from different times, different writers. So interviews with Horst Janssen, studies of the whole idea of what could have happened with Kronos, original reviews, production notes, and interestingly just the original campaign book. Interestingly, you can see from the press book, maybe not from this part, the UK press book, but certainly here, that Kronos was the second feature, more or less, in that pairing with the girl with the Thunderbolt kick. And then there's a publicity handout reproduction So the only thing really missing from here, has to be said, is the original screenplay, which would have been nice, but it's certainly not necessary. I think this is a great little book. Again, as with a lot of the books that you get with discs now, this is its own standalone thing in itself. Something like that would sit on your bookshelf if you think of the various books published by the BFI and others, guides to individual movies. These are equally the size of those. What we also have here is a poster, which again is two versions, the UK artwork and the US poster art. I'm not sure whether you want to put these on your wall or not. I mean, if you're a fan, I suppose, if you have them framed, keep them in good condition. And then the set of lobby cards. These are always nice little reproductions to have if you're a collector. These are US lobby card reproductions, and I'll leave them in here. Again, a pleasant little addition. And finally, we have Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter, the graphic novel. So let's talk a little bit about this. So you may be wondering where this graphic novel emerges from, which is essentially an adaptation of the film itself. You can see here, together with an all-new adventure for Kronos, an unfilmed story, which is in 3 parts. Now, I've read these before. They originally appeared in House of Hammer magazine. The Kronos sequel, I suppose you could call it, was in the first issue, which we see here. House of Hammer, if you are unfamiliar with it, and it's possible that you are, was a publication that launched in 1976 and was a mix of comic strips and film articles. Rather more comic strips in these early issues than in some of the later ones, but often the strips were adaptations of Hammer films into comic form. This first issue features a quite lengthy adaptation of Dracula, the 1958 Hammer film. So that's yeah, it's extensive. It's 20 pages long, and then after a few articles we get the original Kronos comic strip. There's also another strip at the back of this first issue, the Van Helsing Terror Tales. So as you can see, at this stage of the magazine's incarnation, it was very much a half and half between being a comic book and a movie magazine. This is issue 2, where the Kronos story continues. The main Hammer adaptation in this was The Curse of Frankenstein, as it was in issue 3. They split it between 2 issues, so here's the Kronos continuation. And I think already by this point the comic strip are being eased back slightly to allow more movie coverage. So here with issue 3, there's the second half of the Frankenstein story, which, as you can see, they've split it to make more room for movie articles. And we also have the third part of the Kronos story. And you can see there. So it wasn't until issue 20, by which time the magazine had changed its title to Hammer's House of Horror, which then was quickly changed again to Hammer's Halls of Horror because of copyright problems with that title. James Warren in the US had sneakily already copyrighted it, and the change of title in the first place had been to make the magazine more popular with US readers, which didn't seem to work because it only lasted for 4 more issues after the title change. But here you get the actual movie adaptation. There's also an article in this particular issue about vampire hunters. Often there would be a piece to coincide with the film being adapted. It has to be said that House of Hammer wasn't, despite its title, entirely about Hammer Films. I think maybe that was the idea to begin with, but while Hammer was still a going concern just about when this launched in 1976, with To the Devil a Daughter about to be released, very quickly it became clear that there just wasn't the requirement for a Hammer fan magazine that would cover what the company are doing, because the company weren't doing anything. So while the later issues would run various features on Hammer Films and did an ambitious history of Hammer in its later issues, it also ran reviews and news about horror movies in general. It was a great magazine, actually, and it was a real shame that it kind of fizzled out. Deskin, the editor, went on to Starburst and UK Marvel. That's a story for another day, I suspect. And if you're a fan of Kronos comics, there's also the Titan Publications comic strip series from a few years ago. I haven't actually got copies of that myself, other than as PDFs. But they were, as I recall, the first issue, at least, the only one I've got, is quite interesting. And again, good to see that Kronos is being revived and adapted. I think you can also get the soundtrack to the movie if you so wish. It's a pretty good score by Laurie Johnson, very swashbuckling and adventurous. Johnson, of course, did the Avengers music as well, so as you can imagine, he and Clemens worked well together, and his music is far removed from the classic horror movie score. So very impressive. So this is a gorgeous piece of work, and as a statement of intent from the new Hammer, it's pretty spectacular. Since then, there have been a few others. I think 2 of the Quatermass films are already out, or at least one of them is out and the other one is about to be out. Curse of Frankenstein has been announced, and also they're doing quite a lot of, I guess we could call them pre-horror Hammers, pre-Quatermass Hammers. So films like Blood Orange, for instance. Some of their film noirs, their thrillers, their early science fiction films, which is fascinating, and I hope that works. Obviously, they're not the movies that necessarily have the biggest collector appeal, but at the same time, they well deserve resurrection, and to see them in amazing editions like this. And it does seem that this is effectively the standard for most of these Hammer releases, obviously not all, perhaps with the comic strip, but yes, a whole collection of these on your shelf would, I imagine, look jolly nice. If I get to see any more of these, I'm gonna get to see at least one more of these for sure. Then I will explore them too and let you know what they're like. As for the films themselves, well, this isn't a channel that goes into technical details about picture resolution, sound quality, how something is encoded. I don't measure the aspect ratios, all that kind of thing. There are plenty of people out there who are doing that if you really want all those details. What I'll say is that for me, looking at it just with the naked eye on my TV, which I think is how most normal people watch films, then these are great. This is the best I've ever seen this film. I haven't watched all 3 different versions of it, but nevertheless, it does look fantastic. It's had a lot of love and attention poured into it. As I said, the Brian Clemens documentary is well worth seeing in itself. He's a guy who has such a fascinating story, made so much good stuff over the years, not just the Avengers, the new Avengers, things like The Professionals, the great Women in Peril series thriller, films like Blind Terror, things like Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde for Hammer, which she wrote, didn't direct, and plenty more interesting stuff. He always had the problem, particularly in TV, of making the wrong kind of shows, the kind of shows that outside of the Avengers the critics would just sneer at, and they were too populist, too commercial, too much fun. But Clemens is somebody who I'll definitely take a further look at in some detail at a later point, probably on the Overlooked Hotel rather than here on Desperate Living. So if it hasn't become clear yet, I'm impressed with this. Very impressed. I think the bar has been raised quite highly for the treatment of single movies with this particular box. And let's hope that it can long carry on. So as ever, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Are you a fan of Captain Kronos? What do you make of this extravagant and, yes, has to be said, rather expensive set? What do you want to see Hammer doing next? Would you like to see them getting back into film production? What's your favourite Hammer movie? Let us all know in the comments. If you enjoy this sort of thing, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Desperate Living. We have another box set review for a very different collection of films coming up in a few days. And plenty more to cover in the coming weeks and months. So, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.